All right, athletes, episode 3 of the Extraordinary podcast. Let's get this thing started. Today we're going to talk about the experience that myself and Coach Maddie had in the USA. And I've been writing a couple of blog posts. I've done 2 so far. So let's get cranked off with our intro music that I'm probably going to have to start paying money for because... wall to wall and I still ain't sold out. Because it's also 100% not copyrighted for me to play that for the 5 seconds that I play it for. But hey, we aren't professional yet. All right, this week, episode 3, the Extraordinary podcast, we're discussing the trip that Coach Maddie and I went on to the US just recently. As most of you who are going to be watching this know, we went all the way to the USA. And the whole point of that trip was to have an experience holiday. So we were going away to experience what it was like at different CrossFit facilities, what it was like to train in different environments. Not very often we get to be the athlete at a class or experience a class from the other side of the whiteboards other than our own. So it was really nice to be able to go all the way across the world, a 26-hour flight, to get ourselves over to experience another class, which I'm 100% certain we could have done a lot closer than that. But if you're going to do something, well, you may as well do it right, hey? Or something along those lines. So far I've written 2 blog posts in regards to our experiences. There will be 4 that will be written, and each one is about each different facility that we went to. I'm going to keep this conversation very specific to the experiences that we had at the gyms that we visited. And the first place that we visited was in Cookeville. So long story short, we flew the 26 hours to Atlanta. We had a 30-minute layover between a 11-hour flight into a 15-hour flight. To say that that flight was hell would be a complete understatement. But we got there in the end, and when we got to America, we were able to do all of the dream things that we'd set out to do. We got a pickup truck. We went all the way. We drove to our hotel near the Atlanta airport. We spent a couple of days around Atlanta before we went out to Cookeville. Now, anyone who's been in the CrossFit scene for long enough knows that in Cookeville is CrossFit Mayhem. That is Rich Froning's gym. And if you've been doing CrossFit for as long as I have, to go to the CrossFit Mayhem facility is definitely a bucket list activity. When I started CrossFit, Rich Froning was still doing individual competitions. We're talking 2014. I started to do CrossFit. 2015 was my first Open. So yeah, next year's Open will be 10 years of CrossFit for me. So to even just be in that facility was very surreal, to say the least, and to even be able to do something like that. So we got to Cookeville, and also the other side of that story was that Maddie, for her birthday, had decided that we were going to book Rich Froning's wife's Airbnb. His wife's name's Hillary. And yeah, that was even cool in itself. So we go to the CrossFit Mayhem because we hadn't done many drop-ins before around ever. We didn't really know what to expect. So we visited their website. They didn't have a week's casual pass there. So we went all the way out to the facility. We wanted to see what the child mining facilities were going to look like. We wanted to notice what the layout was and just double check that we were going to be okay to train there with the kids. Because we were international, we didn't have any babysitters. It was going to be a lot harder for us if they didn't have child mining services and we'd have to split between the 2 of us, Maddie and myself. So we go out to CrossFit Mayhem, we walk in the door, and we were not disappointed with the level of service from the very second that we got there. We walk in, there's a girl behind the counter. I'm pretty sure her name was Michaela. She introduced us to one of the coaches, Lauren, who showed us around, told us how we could book in for our first classes, where the kids would be minded. She was very helpful. Everyone was so friendly. Everything was really nice. And we got off, which was really nice, because I was really concerned that there's that saying, like, be careful when you meet your heroes because you might be disappointed. And I thought we might end up with something like that, like being disappointed with being going to that bucket list facility. But it turns out we weren't. So Lauren shows us around. They give us the head coach, Josh's email, and we are able to book in for our first class and then pay the difference to do a casual week. So that was seamless, to say the least. that they were accommodating. We paid 75 USD for the week. To put that into perspective, I think VAS strength and conditioning is $68 for a casual week. That's AUD. USD, you're talking add another third on top of that. So it was $125 for the week for us just to train at CrossFit Mayhem. Did we care? Not really. Do I think conversion rates when it comes to the dollar matters? Not really, because it's not their fault that our dollar doesn't do us a favor when we go over there. So you could look at it like it's $125 AUD if you want to, but ideally it's $75 USD. Given the level of space, equipment, freedom, everything that you have there, like unlike a facility like VSC where it's pretty much just class-based program, or it is basically that with some sort of access to some open gym time. Sometimes they're basically open gym all the time. They've got 12 GHDs, 12 Echo bikes, 12 assault bikes, you name it, you can get it there and you can do it there. And that's, I guess, what you would expect from a very high-end performance-based CrossFit facility internationally. And I mean, it's Rich Froning's gym. They have a whole nother section for their professional athletes anyway, but they used to train on that side of the gym where we were on that day. Excuse the guy next door who's decided to start working at 7 a.m. in the morning. So we do our first class there, and this is the part where it gets a little bit different. So what we wanted to experience when we got there was, yes, not only the drop-in capabilities of each facility, but also what was it like to do a class somewhere else. The cool part about that gym was definitely the fact that the workouts were able to be a little bit more entertaining for performance athletes like us because of the nature of the equipment that they had. I'm pretty sure our first workout that we did there, we were able to use the ski erg. So it was ski ergs and burpee bar touches, but we don't have ski ergs here. However, one thing that did differ that I would say we didn't enjoy was that as we sort of did the advanced strength and conditioning, we have a very specific brief system where you read the board from the top to the bottom. We then also make sure that we demonstrate all the movement patterns and really elaborate on how we're going to execute the class. Probably the difference is because we know the level of capabilities of our athletes, not very often we get some drop-ins, and if we do, they're usually going to be quite experienced. Whereas in this class that we first attended, they had like 4 to 6 drop-ins in the same class, and we're all from different areas. So I'm going to assume that their automatic reaction is we know what we're doing. Problem with assuming is if somebody doesn't know what they're doing, then you have to make a quick pivot at that point. And when they did their brief, they didn't really point out too much in regards to where we would do the workout, how the workroom layout was going to look like, the specifics of exactly what we were going to do. So they did give us the freedom to go train near the kids, but the problem with that was like there was the space all the way down the other end of the gym compared to where the class would generally be run. It wouldn't be how I would do things, but I can sort of understand how they were trying to accommodate us with, you know, kids that were in a different area. But from a different country. We're in an area. The classroom is or space is really quite far away from the child minding section, even though it is still on the floor. So yeah, I guess that can be that part. But the interesting part in all of the classes was that it was very much focused on the workout of the day itself, and all of the strength components or elements were generally after the workout itself. And what that lost was a lot of community element to some people just leaving straight after the workout. Maybe it's something that they do because of the time they've got, and feels a bit more of like a residential farm sort of place. So not dissimilar to Bustleton in that regard, where people probably had to exit pretty quick, so they do the workout first. But you would assume that they would really want people to block that time out and focus on both elements. But when we asked about it, they said, oh yeah, people kind of leave after the workout. Some stayed and some didn't, but that was where the elements of the coaching sort of dissipated away in the class, and you were left to what you needed to do to get those bits done, and there was no sort of wind down of a class. And I bring that back to them not writing scores on the board, which seemed to be a bit of a theme across the board training elsewhere across the states, that no one really took much of that element of it. So class structure wise, it was great classes. Were they very specific in the breakdown and the elements of what they would need to be doing? Not really. Room layout wasn't really laid out. We did a lot of the organizing, not in a time to organize, but it was kind of done during the warm up. We were told to get our equipment, do all those. But did it dissipate from the experience? A little bit if you're really focusing on that part of it. If you really wanted to just be able to have a fun time with the coach standing around you and be able to execute a workout, then 100%. And I almost think that's exactly what they're doing, that their main hub there is that you're either doing Mayhem Compete programming, you're visiting to be able to train in that facility. If you are doing a class, you're probably a local who would get that help and that assistance. But if you're doing a drop-in class, you really just want to have fun, do a workout and get as much volume in as you can. And probably, to be honest, muck around with all of the machines afterwards. We got to run on an air mill for the first, assault runner or an air mill for the first time. We got to ride echo bikes. We got to use GHDs in the middle of a workout. We did some barbells. We did some heavy lifts. We did some 1RMs. It was really a good time for an athlete that is looking at doing all of that extraordinary stuff that you'd want from a class and be able to do your own thing. And I almost think that's exactly what they were going for. They just had a coach there to be able to manage you a little bit if you were new to the experience. 100% though, the other part that we really loved about CrossFit Mayhem was that their management was so approachable. I've never hugged another manager before. I've shook their hands. But when we were leaving, the head coach, Josh, was in the car park. I think he was unloading milk or shopping or something, probably in my head, it's for a staff activity. But in my head, he was doing something for a bigger group of people than himself. And he was pulling a heap of shopping out of the car and he was like, oh my God, thank you for visiting. Thank you for joining us. And he gave us a hug in the car park. Like I said, I'm not a hugger. Maddie definitely would have been more than happy to do that. But I was a bit like, but did it anyway. And then they told us that we were more than welcome to return back on our way back through from Nashville if we had the time, which we were hoping we'd have the time, but we didn't. We went to Atlanta instead. And I 100% would have gone back there. So many other factors about visiting Cookeville that was great for us. We got to see Rich Froning. He purposely came over to us and introduced himself to us in the car. I was the most dumbfounded I've ever been, emotional. That to me was probably one of my most surreal moments and made doing what we do so real. Like, you remember why you do this when you meet someone like that. You know, he's been doing this sport for so long and his facility is so old in a good way that to tick that off, to meet him, to see him, and for him to come over to our car, he introduced himself to us, he introduced himself to the boys, and he even made a comment because when we named our first son Laken, we did admittedly name our first son Laken not after Lakeland, his daughter, but it was a influence into the name that we liked and what we wanted to name him. And Rich Froning says, oh, what's the boy's name? Because I was sitting in the back of the car and we were like, Matty goes, oh, Laken and Brooklyn. He goes, wow, Laken, that's very close to Lakeland. And then both of us looked at each other and we were like, oh. Anyway, cool times. Loved Cookeville, loved CrossFit Mayhem. I do highly recommend go out and experience that, but I do want to make it clear. I felt like the experience that they had was very much lent towards the open gym element of the place. There was classes available like there should be. Great programming was there. It was fun programming. It was different programming. But it allowed us to have some freedom to do some of our own things. That's part one of our blog post. And this week I'm not reading straight out of those blogs. I'm sort of just going over that blog. But the second blog post that I wrote was actually about our second gym experience in the US, which was at CrossFit East Nashville. Now, not the same style of experience. Admittedly, by the time we got to CrossFit East Nashville, we had been doing a lot of holidaying at this point. We were having beers on a regular basis. We were starting to have had a lot more of the fast food elements and things that you would expect to do in America. We were at least 10 days into our holiday at this point by the time we moved on from Cookeville into Nashville. We were preparing to go to a country music festival. And what ended up happening was the way that we got to CrossFit East Nashville was we were planning on going to Proven, which is Tia Claire Toomey's gym, over on the other side of the city. So the way that sort of the two gyms were we were staying right in the middle of the city. So if you sort of imagine this is the CBD, we were sort of here. And then on either side, you had sort of off to the, I don't even know, off to the side on my GPS, there was CrossFit Proven and then, or Proven HQ. And then CrossFit East Nashville was over near Nissan Stadium. Now, we needed to get to Nissan Stadium the next night after we had trained to go to the Country Music Festival, the CMA Festival. So we planned to go to Proven, but we had done some activities at the Science Centre that day. We did a couple of kids' activities so that Lakin had a bit of fun. We went into Broadway, we went food shopping, we did a couple of bits and pieces that sort of pushed our time out a little bit. And I wanted to see how easy it was going to be to get to Nissan Stadium because we had to drive to get to the concert. Because we had Brooklyn, we weren't going to walk. We were being told do not walk in Nashville at night time, which I think is pretty stock standard in a city. Particularly in the US, there's a lot of homelessness, and there is a lot of homelessness near where we were. And where we were staying, there was like ghetto on one side, like state housing on one side of the apartment blocks. And then on the other side of the apartment blocks was more of like a updated, where we were, which was like a little bit nicer. But that was like literally on that side of the street, state housing, ghetto blocks, like people sitting out the front. It was the most American thing I've ever seen. On our side, nice apartment blocks, kind of built up. So you could see the disparities between the two areas. So we were told do not walk at night time, which we were not argumentative about, and we're not going to push that limit. We were also told don't go into Broadway at night time with the kids. We found out the reason why that was the case too. So we drove over to the Nissan Stadium side of the city, and CrossFit East Nashville was just out the back. So we'd learned it was only going to take us 5 to 6 minutes to get to where we needed to be, even though I thought the next night there'd be way more traffic, things would be blocked up. There was no way that was going to happen. We knew it was close enough. To get into CrossFit East Nashville, there was so much signage. It was awesome. You were able to know exactly where to park, where the building was, how you're going to get in there, all that sort of stuff. And I'm almost 100% certain that their parking bays out the front of the building were going to be used the next night as one of the lots for the festival for parking. So out the back was where we had to park. So we did. But that's kind of where the simplicity of the whole experience ended. From there, when we walked down this long hallway, it really looked like the whole area looked a lot like a port shearing shed style, where you go and pick up a lot of, deliveries. That's kind of what it looked like. It just looked like a bit like the East Shed markets in Fremantle is the only way I can describe it. But it worked. And the gym itself was inside of one of those. It had very high ceilings, very similar to Vast Strength and Conditioning, very high ceilings, very wide open space, probably 3 times as much space as what we have. We walked in the door though, and at the front door was a semi-made coffee shop sort of thing area. Like I don't even know if it had a coffee there. I know it had a fridge for some drinks and that was about it. I can't remember. To be honest, I kind of blank out a lot of the introductory stuff there because it was so much us left to our own devices. There wasn't really much memorable, positive stuff to remember. We walked in, we were left by ourselves. We got to have a look at the apparel. There was we had to work out where the kids were going to go. And then eventually, after about 5 or 6, maybe even closer to 10 minutes, somebody came over, and it was a member, and introduced themselves to us. Now, I can't remember his name. Again, don't remember this because I was thinking, hang on, the coach is over there. Why have we not been looked at? And we never got looked at any point up until this point by the coach to acknowledge that we were there. Personally, I would just at least acknowledge, say, hey, I'll be with you soon. No matter how far away I am, I would look at that person, I would point, I would wave, I'd do something. But that never happened. Member comes over, explains to us that we're going to love this coach because she's a CrossFit level 3 coach, and for some reason we should love that shit. Eventually, she comes over and introduces herself to us. But as we were sort of getting, comfortable to start the class, you could just feel the vibe of her being like, yeah, she's a CrossFit level 3. We'd explained that we owned a gym back in Australia. We were there to see what class structures were like. And we really, we were visiting Nashville. It was going to be so much fun and blah, blah, and a bit of our story, but no real interest in that. And then when the class started, she was so boisterous, energetic, bouncing around. But explaining to us that went through the warm-up and it was going to be a 1-rep max deadlift day and that everybody was going to lift with perfect technique and perfect form. Which in my head, I'm like, well, that's always the case. One thing that I really don't like is when people hone in on, you're going to lift with perfect technique, you're going to make sure that you go injury-free. Of course they fucking are. That's the whole, that is not a unique selling point of anybody's, that someone's going to lift well and they're going to lift with perfect technique. That's our job. That's our goal. Of course, that's our goal. I don't know why people have to say that stuff out loud. So we do that part, and my mind's already turned off on the fact that she's a CrossFit level 3 and that she's going to keep us safe doing 1-rep maxes. And all at the same time, that it's hard work pays off programming, and that it is going to be a good class because it's written by Matt Fraser. Again, same thing. I get it. Like, you're doing HWPO's programming, you're doing an 8-week cycle, and now we're testing your deadlifts again. But ideally, I don't know, the way it was pushed towards that we would enjoy it because it was HWPO, that was something that we were going to enjoy just for that reason, which was never going to be the case. It's not about the program. It's about the experience and the delivery of that program. So we get into it, we do the warm-ups, and then I get partnered up. Well, I partner myself up with a guy called Matt. That's one thing I do like. I do like when it's strength days, you partner up with somebody. That's a good chance to be social. It's a good chance to work with somebody new and fresh. It's a good chance just to have a conversation with somebody. You're just lifting, you're just finding a 1-rep max. So I meet this guy, Matt. He's an insurance broker from Ohio. He's just moved to the area. Turns out he's not there for music. It just happened to be that his officers were able to move him around, and then he ends up in Nashville. Sick place to end up if your business is going to relocate you. Can confirm Nashville is great. But as a person who lifts with a bit of a round back, and I don't personally have a perfect deadlift technique, and I've never had it, but I've never hurt myself deadlifting, and I've never had a problem deadlifting. I got a couple of side eyes. The coach sort of came over a few times and said like, oh yeah, but like do this, 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 and this. And I'm like, yep, okay. And I didn't argue. I would never do that. I was just like, okay, yes. And it made me feel self-conscious that I couldn't go any heavier because all I was going to cop was from her that the deadlift form was not this perfect thing. Exactly what I would expect from a CrossFit level 3, that someone who wants to just be real particular about a technical issue, even though we can sometimes have good efficiencies without that. There's a good story about Tia Claire Toomey being told that she shouldn't squat with her knees buckling in, her trying to spend more time keeping her knees out, ends up with a back injury because of that, goes back to letting her knees buckle in. Well, we're talking about the world's fittest woman here. Turns out that motor unit pattern was fine for her, and she ended up with less injuries because she was allowing her knees to buckle in and then pushing them out. I agree with that for most things that's going to be the case. There are definitely some times where you can't just be told that your technique is okay. Like, there is a majority of things that you should focus on and work on. But when you've been doing this for this long, or maybe you have got some bad tendencies, they're going to stay. And as long as you don't get injured, that's okay. So having someone tell you that you need to fix those things, I wouldn't worry about it. But when you go and complain why you can't get better at it, that's another whole different story and a whole other thing. So that happens. We end up doing the workout. Maddie and I decide not to do the RX Plus version of that workout. The workout was a 1,600 meter row, 40 box jumps, and 40 feet of weighted lunges with a kettlebell was just like a 24 kilo kettlebell on the shoulder. Otherwise, it was going to be a 30-inch box, and it was going to be a 32 kilo kettlebell, and you had to do 60 feet, which we should have done the RX Plus because both Maddie and I were done in around about the 6 to 8 minute mark. We were well ahead of everybody else in that class. Didn't matter. We were not bragging. Just the point being, we should have pushed ourselves that little bit further. And we thought at that point we'd holidayed so much that there was no way we were going to be able to lift heavy and we were going to be able to do this workout without dying. But it turned out we did. Then the closure of the class, the lady, again, I can't remember her name. I don't actually remember a lot of that sort of stuff. When we get to the next two parts, I better lay out everybody's names, because I think I just wanted to almost let go of that experience. The workout was fine. Everything was fine. Just the way it was sort of played out was by the time we'd finished the class, everyone gets around in a circle and the coach said, who here believes they lifted with perfect form? And less than half of the class's hands go up. Ideally, you would assume that at that point, everybody thinks that they've lifted well or perfectly because she's done her job well. That's kind of the point, is when you're coaching, is you're making people feel confident, competent, and comfortable with the exercise experience. Asking them if people have lifted with perfect technique is not accomplishing that for anybody. In fact, it's alienating people, making them feel worse. So that for me was one of the biggest pitfalls of that class, asking that question. I would never recommend my coaches do that. I just don't think that's fair, because ideally, as far as they're concerned, they did everything perfect. They got through the class, they did it all well. And if they didn't, you would have picked them up on how to fix that well before the end of the class. From there, they all got together, they gave a huddle, they did a 1, 2, 3 cheer thing, which I thought was cool, but would we do it in Australia? Probably not. I think it's very much a cheerleader American thing. I think it would work for that sort of format and that sort of system, but our format here, it just wouldn't work. And then we were just left off to ourselves. We were lucky enough to meet the owner of the facility, who then helped us get our shirts. So because everywhere we went, we wanted to buy clothes, so we bought some shirts. We bought some Element sachets to try, because we'd never had those before, like a fancy Hydrolyte. And we were concerned with dehydration with the amount of beers we were going to drink and the junk food we were going to drink, and the amount we were having to buy bottled water on a regular basis, because we never had big enough bottles. They were always just glasses, and obviously neither Maddie or myself like to just drink 200 mils of water each time we go for a drink. We drink half a litre or to a litre at a time. So that's just sort of what happens. And then that was it. It was over. He showed us how to check in, but the coach did nothing outside of coaching the class or basically alienating everyone from what they were doing, rather than making people feel confident and competent at those points. Could that have been our problem? Maybe. You know, you're talking about experienced coaches rocking up on a 1RM deadlift day. We lifted heavy, and I'll point out that neither of us tried to PB at that point either, because that would be crazy. You're on holidays. Don't try and we didn't even know how to convert the kilos to the poundages anyway. We just went off a feel, which is exactly how we would coach. So the learning experience that we had so far from our whole US trip over the first two facilities was this. Number one, in Cookville, they were so community and family friendly and orientated that it made us feel great. You could tell that the vibe was, it's more about the open gym facility than the class facility. Is that great for experienced athletes? Yes, it is. Would that be great for people who didn't really know who Rich Froning was and go and do a class? Probably not. They probably would have just wanted to do a class and not known who he was. But if you're doing CrossFit, pretty unlikely you don't know who he is. 9 out of 10. CrossFit Mayhem. Really, really loved it. Boom. CrossFit East Nashville. Don't get a CrossFit Level 3 coach if they're not going to be more about the people than the way that they talk or distribute their information for themselves. Crazy. Did not rate that experience that well in regards to the class format, and for that reason we didn't go back. Did we plan to go there in the first place? Kind of, but not really. Did we plan to go there again? Kind of, not really. Had it have been a really good experience, we probably would have bounced between the two, but we never did. It's vital that you make drop-ins and people like that feel comfortable. How would I have dealt with that situation? I would have asked, even though I was an owner, even though it's a coach, I will always ask, what is your focus when it comes to deadlifts? What are you trying to achieve when it comes to this movement pattern? Where are you at? What do you feel? What kind of conversation can we have so that we can now negotiate on what we want, what we're going to do together, and where are we going to meet in the middle so that you can have a good experience and I can have a good coaching experience of you. That was never met, but I would expect that from a CrossFit level 3. That's a lot of work to get there and a big label to have. So that's kind of our 2 experiences in the US for the CrossFit. 100% hold on for the next 2 parts, because part 3 of the blog post series, we went to Proven, and then part number 4 was actually where we did the most homework to try and find a gym to train in Atlanta. It took me a day and a half of checking websites. Not really, it didn't take me a whole day and a half. It just sort of me flicking backwards and forwards and checking stuff out on where we went to CrossFit Venture. I always Vitruvian and CrossFit Venture in Atlanta. And we went there for a very particular reason that they put on their website, which I have now copied and put onto our website. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this didn't ramble on too long. Remember, the goal is to become extraordinary, be more than ordinary, and break out through that little bit extra on top of. Take it easy, and I'll see you soon.